Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jared Deal. This is the Louder Now podcast. Chelsea Hansen, she's the host of Beyond the Picket Fence podcast. And I met her just through another guest of the podcast and connected on Instagram, which I love when that kind of stuff happens. So this has been a long time coming to get this published, and I'm gonna just let you guys drop in on this convo. We have a merging of faith and mental health and grief and all the stuff I love to talk about on here. So here is my talk with Chelsea Hansen.
But yeah, what have some of your struggles been with mental health? And I know a little bit from what I've asked you.
That's okay. I'll
Maybe you
go
could
into
start
it.
there. If you've ever gotten a diagnosis or what's been some of the things that led to you know,
Sure. Awesome. Well, first of all, I have to say thank you for letting me
yeah.
come on the
Yeah,
show.
of
I
course.
am stoked about your show. I mean, I loved it already. And then because you have hosted people that I love already. And
Yeah.
then you mentioned a Lady Gaga song in one of your episodes, which Lady Gaga is my boo. I love her. And I,
Nice. Oh, the Top Gun episode.
yes,
Oh
exactly.
my gosh, the movie
Oh
was
yeah, you didn't mention Lady Gaga. You talked about Top Gun, and then I thought of Lady Gaga because the
Oh,
song
right.
that she
Oh,
did
was
for
that
that
right?
movie was
Yes.
huge. Yes.
I
Oh,
know.
okay.
Well, the movie, it was crazy because it was like filmed in like 2018, and then now here, because of COVID and stuff, it's like 4 years later. So I'm sure
Yeah.
she did that song like 4 years ago. So
I know she's probably been like anticipating it to come out. It's such a good song and so needed. So if you guys haven't heard that song, go listen to it. Hold My Hand by Lady Gaga about mental health. Oh, so good. And then third of all, I just have to thank you for being one of the few men, as Brene Brown would say, in the arena of being vulnerable, because so many men, aren't invited to come and be loud about mental health. So it's so valuable. And I just thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, of
Of
course.
course, of course.
Yeah.
So I am Chelsea Hansen, and I'll just kind of do a quick my story. So my biggest thing that I have struggled with, and this isn't directly mental health yet, but I'll get into where it turned into mental health, is I've always struggled with jealousy, or for lack of better term, not as much jealousy, but just comparison. Like I look around and I've always been comparing myself to others, and not in a way. Some people use comparison as like to make like, oh, I want to be like that, so I'm going to be like that, and it makes themselves better. But me,
Mhm.
I looked around at how everyone else was amazing and how I was not good enough or whatever. So
Okay.
this feeling like ebbed and flowed through my whole life, and it never really caused me problems. It was irritating and I didn't like it because it doesn't feel good to feel like a jealous person. And so
Right.
it was just what it was. And then we grow up, and then there was MySpace, and then MySpace was fun. You could
My say.
This is how I'm like younger than you, because MySpace was when I was in junior high. So you were in college, I was in junior high. So there was
Okay. Yes.
MySpace, and then it turned into Facebook, and then eventually turned into Instagram.
Right.
So now I'm this person who compares myself to people,
Okay.
seeing the perfect moments of everyone else's life, right?
Right.
Like that is what you get on social media. And so it was irritating. And every year, like I got married young and I had a family. And I just, every year around graduation time, I would see people like graduating college and doing all these amazing things. And I was always like, and what am I? I'm just a stay at home mom. Wah. And so that was not good for my mental health, just regular mental health. But what really triggered it, so my family has history. My dad is on anxiety medicine. There's five of us girls all together, and one, two, three, four, maybe three out of the five. Actually, I think all of us have been on medication except for one. And then
Oh
both
wow.
my
Okay.
my mom's mom has been on anxiety medicine, and then my dad's dad has been on anxiety medicine. So mental health has just been in my blood, but it never really triggered for me. I was always like, I have anxiety in my family history, but I don't have anxiety because I'm great. Or I just didn't, accept the fact that I had. It's easy to tell someone else, go get on medicine, you need it. but for some reason it's hard to accept it for yourself. I don't know why. Or like go to
Okay.
therapy, but then to get yourself to do it, it
Sure.
takes a while. So all of this to say, that was all in the background, right? Me comparing. And then it happened and I couldn't face it anymore. So it was, let's see, it was December. No, when did I have my baby? When's his birthday? June. It was June 2017, and I was pregnant with my son, my second child,
Okay.
and I went to a doctor's office and had like, the whole scan, and they found there was something wrong with the heart. And then they were like, "Come back and get your anatomy scan the second time."
Okay.
So I went back and got it scanned the second time. My husband was like, "Do you want me to come?" And I'm like, "No, it's fine. They're just going to find everything and then whatever." So my husband went golfing. He feels bad about that, but he was out golfing. And, I'm getting the ultrasound and it gets like
Okay.
kind of taking a long time. And then I'm like, "What's going on?" And she's like, "The doctor will talk to you in the next room." And I was like, "Okay, something's wrong." So I go in the other room. Long story short, my son had a major cardiac congenital heart defect. And so this is like where there's a moment of churchiness involved, is that I was feeling stressed and sad, just normal stress and sad when you should feel sad, right? And then my father came and gave me in my church. There's a thing called a priesthood blessing where they lay your hands on your head and they give you like a blessing through the power of God, what God would have you know, or like someone speaking through the power of God to you from God Himself.
Okay.
And so I got a blessing that just blessed me to have peace. So the whole pregnancy, the rest of the pregnancy, I just felt peaceful. And then he was born, was in the NICU for a little while, and I still felt peaceful. After 16 days in the NICU, he got to come home and it was fine. Like he wasn't as blue as they said he was going to be, and he couldn't have his heart surgery yet. The goal was to get him to grow big enough, long enough to get his heart ready for surgery. So
Okay.
he was on a few medicines, but he was nursing. But the way he nursed was like 5 minutes every 20 minutes. Like he was always nursing.
Okay. Wow.
And so everything was pretty good. So we go in, finally, it's October 2017. He's 4 months old, and it's finally time for this surgery. And we go in, and he gets the surgery, and he comes out. And I was a little nervous because I had seen pictures of babies with tubes on, and I was like, that's what it's going to look like. He gets out of surgery. He's being watched very carefully, and he's on all these tubes, but it's going as planned, right? We were supposed to be in the hospital for 10 to 14 days, is like, that's how long it takes to recover from open heart surgery. So it was the day after. It was October 11th, 2017,
Okay.
when anxiety happened to me.
Okay.
So it was the next morning after surgery, and it was time to take the breathing tube out. And it was me, my husband, the respiratory therapist, and his nurse. And I always joke with those two. It was my favorite nurse and favorite respiratory therapist. All four of us hanging out together, it always felt like a double date. I don't think they really liked each other, but
Double.
it was always so fun to hang out with them. And so it was like my favorite people in the room. We were just relaxed, having a good old time, and they were like, "We're going to lower his sedation and start to take the breathing tube out." So the respiratory therapist walks over and jiggles the condensation in the breathing tube. And as he's jiggling it, they had already lowered his sedation. And as they were jiggling it, they didn't even pull the breathing tube out. Jackson had pulmonary hypertension, so his pulmonary artery was trying to protect himself from being overflowed with blood, which had been normally happening. It didn't realize that his heart was fixed. So
Okay.
his pulmonary artery clamped and just completely shut off. And his numbers, I was standing right in front of his bed, and his numbers started to slowly dip. And then they were like tapping his feet. They were like, "Jackson, Jackson." And all of a sudden, he just went completely blue. And me and my husband were just standing there, and they called the code blue. And we were
Wow.
just standing there staring at our son, who was now dead in his bed. I like have seen my son dead. And instead of they opened the doors, the whole team, all of a sudden there was like 30 people in the room, and instead of getting out of the room, we just like got pushed into the room because all of the people were in there. And the chaplain came and was like praying over us, and it was 36 minutes. He was gone for 36 minutes getting CPR. The ultrasound tech was, or the echo tech was on his heart, and you could just hear like no cardiac activity, no cardiac activity. And then they're doing CPR, and then they'd say clear, and they shocked him with the little paddles 6 times. So it was a very traumatic event. And before this, I had been a really positive, always pretty go lucky person, and always like kind of how I am now, just like bubbly and whatever. And it was really easy for me to be happy because I haven't really experienced a lot of trauma or childhood trauma, which
Right.
after interviewing lots of people, I realized that's very rare. So I'm very blessed.
Right. Oh, to not experience it.
Yeah, to
Right.
not
Right.
experience childhood trauma is very rare. And I didn't know that.
Yes.
Anyway, so eventually we were staying at the Ronald McDonald House in Phoenix because our house was pretty far from the hospital. We didn't want to be that far. And that night we went home, or we went to the Ronald McDonald House, and I just lost it. Like I couldn't stop crying, and I was like not even just normal crying. It was like, people at like funerals where they're just like wailing like uncontrollably. Like I really lost it. The next day we were trying to go to the hospital, and I still was crying like that, and my husband was like, you just gotta go, you cannot be here right now. And so yeah, I just completely lost my happy Chelsea, and I had anxiety all the time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son dead in his bed. Every time I closed my eyes. And he ended up having a lot of complications. We ended up being in the hospital. So we were there October through December. We got out like December 30th, right before the new year. So we were actually there for 3 months, just sorting out all of his stuff. And then we finally got out, and I remember I was like numb kind of, and anxious all the time, and just thoughts circling in my head. And it was interesting to me because my husband went through the same experience, and he was like normal sad. That like
Mhm.
it's normal to be sad or to feel angry or think at
Normal
certain
sad.
things.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's like a sadness that is like overtaking you and you can't control it, which I felt like that is more, and it felt anxious. Like I just felt, when you go to the doctor and you have to fill out the survey, and there's like anxiety questions and then like depression questions.
Right.
It was
Yes.
like
Yeah. Done that.
all of the anxiety questions were like all the way, and then the depression questions were like not very much. So I was like, okay, I have anxiety. So I got diagnosed with anxiety and got on Zoloft. I know you've talked about that a little bit. And Zoloft
Oh,
was
Zoloft?
okay. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have. Shoot.
I've been listening to your episodes.
Oh, yeah, now I'm like, shoot, I've done so many episodes I don't
That's
remember.
okay.
But yes, I have tried that before, and I didn't do too great on it, but yes. Isn't that more for depression though?
I thought it was anxiety. The only reason
Oh,
that
okay.
I felt like the doctor didn't really listen. Because as soon as I said, like, I told my mom I was having anxiety, and she's like, well, all your sisters are on Zoloft or whatever. So then, like, my grandma and my sister were both on Zoloft. So I told the doctor, I'm like, I think I'm having this. And she's like, okay. And then I said, I know this medicine works for my sisters. And she's like,
Yeah,
okay. And then she just gave me that.
I just looked it up real quick, and it says depression and anxiety. So it's the anyway, it's the SSRI, so the serotonin, but it can also treat anxiety. Not a
So I,
doctor here, but
so I was on it for anxiety, and it was okay. Like, it got me through. So, like,
okay.
I just navigated life, and I was on it. Um, and then just life kind of normalized, and we learned how to live with a son with a heart defect. And he had like a surgery every year for a while after that. He's had 3 open heart surgeries now. His last one was September 2020. So that was crazy to get surgery during COVID. Um, and then it started, and then we moved. My husband changed careers, and we moved to a different town. And so all of a sudden I was like, and this is recently, this was 2021.
Okay.
We moved, and now I don't have any of my friends and
All right.
anything like that. And I went to a life coach, and knew that I had wanted to start this podcast that I had been dreaming of for like 3 years. And so I started the podcast, and my podcast, so it's called Beyond the Picket Fence, and I tell people's vulnerable stories. So
Okay.
stories of
Yeah.
either mental health, or like some people have been molested or divorced, or we just talk about all of the really hard things, kind of
Wow.
just
Okay.
just
Yeah.
just to prove that no one's life is perfect and you're not alone. I think especially in Christianity, we look around and, people think church is supposed to be a museum for saints, but it's actually a hospital for sinners. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm trying to take off the white picket fence and help people realize
That's
that
cool.
no one's life is perfect. So I narrate these stories on my podcast.
Yeah.
And as I was doing that,
The
um,
beginning of 2021, right? Is that when it started?
that is
The
when I
podcast?
moved.
Oh, that's when you
So
moved. Okay.
okay, so I moved and I was like kind of feeling sad, and I stopped taking my serotonin. I stopped taking my medicine. Like I just did what you did, and I was like, I'm in charge of my own body and I don't need this anymore. Super smart.
Okay, so you were taking meds, you said since 2017-ish or at
Yeah,
the
probably
beginning of
2018. Probably like
okay.
2018 through 2020.
And
And
you got off the meds on your own, but we're not recommending that. But what have
no.
you and then you also talked about okay, you had check mark for everything on anxiety, which I totally relate to that. Like being in that situation of like well, it's not every day, right? And I've done the depression test too with I've done that multiple. I think recently I did it like a year ago, and I was like, oh, I think I'm checking a lot of these.
Yep, yep.
So you kind of discovered that, um, which this is a common thing if people don't know this, but like anxiety and depression are kind of like brothers and sisters with each other.
Yep.
So sometimes you can have anxiety maybe more than depression. Not always, they can be separate, but like a lot of times they go together.
Yeah.
And so what were some of the things that you did kind of like, okay, now I'm not taking these meds, like I got to deal with my relationships, my kids. You still
Mhm.
got some kind of trauma in there. And what were some of the things that helped you kind of get through that?
I love that question. Yes, I actually minimized the trauma. I never accepted that that was a traumatic event for me, because trauma is, getting raped or your parents abusing you. Like that's what trauma is. It's not.
Like the big stuff or something like that, kind of
Yes,
like the big
and
stuff.
so I didn't realize it was a trauma. So I got a life coach. I was off the medicine. I got a life coach. I had had a life coach for a while. And life coaches are a little different because they focus on the future, and then therapy is kind of like healing the past. So I really see that there's a place
Okay,
for both.
interesting. All right. Yeah.
So I got a life coach and eventually found out like the purpose of my life. I really wanted to do this podcast because, like I said, I compared myself my whole life to other people. And I found that when you get to know someone, other people have these crazy stories too. And so I was comparing myself to their perfection when really no one has perfection. Like it may be what you see on social media, but that's not their real story. So I started learning these people's stories and hearing these stories. And I just thought, I should be recording these conversations because I'm blessed to have a gift where somehow people can feel my love and I can ask the questions that are uncomfortable. So my interviews that I do, I ask like the really uncomfortable questions that people are thinking but don't ever ask. I ask those questions. And
Yeah,
so
that's awesome. And you call it Beyond the Picket
beyond the
Fence,
picket
right?
fence, because the
Okay.
picket fence is like the perfect facade. Everyone thinks everyone else's life is perfect, but if you go beyond their picket fence and you get to know them, you'll find out they have struggles. I was listening to your episode and the lady said they put their pants on the same way you do. Like we're all just humans with our own mess.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that was
I only know all your
Megan.
episodes because I've been listening to them this morning.
Oh,
So yeah, I got my life all what I thought was put together, and
yeah.
I started my podcast. And I started this podcast, and it was February. It was Heart Month. It was like I think my fourth episode. February is Heart Month for people with congenital heart defects, and so I
Oh
wanted to
wow.
feature heart people. So I interviewed a mom, someone I was friends with in the hospital, who actually lost her heart angel. Like she actually lost her. I didn't even lose my
Wow.
kid.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and and that triggered my trauma. And then I sunk into what I think is a chemical imbalance. Um, and so I like that you said like being on medicine, you know, helps for now, but you really have to get to the deeper whatever. So I'm in a way I'm grateful that this all triggered because it came up and I had to face it. And so I was like trying life coaching and I was like, well, I don't want to be on medicine because I know I'm not supposed to be on um Zoloft. My body has told me I don't want to be on that. And so I found a doctor that listened and she mixes holistic and modern medicine. So it's not just like a band-aid. They want to get to the root cause.
Yeah.
So I got my hormones checked and I got put on. So I take my testosterone was low and then I got some vitamins. So I got on those and I was on those for about a month and a half and I was still having suicidal thoughts, which I feel like mine is a little bit different because of my faith. I would never kill myself because one, that's scary.
Right.
And I'm like a wimp. I wouldn't actually do it. But I would literally be curled up on my floor crying, just this world would be better without me. My husband would be better off without me. My kids, everyone would be better if I just disappeared. Like those were the thoughts. Or I'm a burden.
Yeah.
Those were the thoughts.
So you were having these thoughts in here.
So I was on the hormones and the vitamins, and I was grateful to have a doctor that was listening to me. And I messaged her and I said, so here's the deal. I've been taking those and I'm still having these thoughts. What do I do? And then she said, well, let's put you, I think you may need a low dose depression medicine. So I did get back on a depression medicine, which I think that, and this one was called like citalopram or something like that. And I really feel back to myself. I really do feel good, but I don't see that it's a long term forever. I think that when you're in the depression, you just need like a lifesaver. Like you just need something to get you a little bit out of it. So then now I can like I've gone to therapy and I've been doing EMDR. And there's a therapy called association replacement therapy, ART.
Okay.
And
I've
I
heard
did
of EMDR, but
yes,
what's the one you just said?
association replacement therapy.
Okay.
And it is a type of EMDR, I believe, if I'm not incorrect. Don't quote me on that. But I decided instead of so I'm kind of doing like the whole approach, like I got my vitamins. I haven't checked my gut though, which that idea keeps coming up and I just listened to your episode where she talked about the gut. But
yeah,
anyway,
that's a new thing for me too, the microbiome and stuff.
yeah, so I'm interested in learning about that. But now that I'm not like laying on the floor falling apart, I actually have the energy to look into that,
Yeah.
So the medicine is like a rescue.
Yeah, sorry,
And
that
now,
was funny. It's not funny. I keep laughing at stuff that's like uncomfortable.
okay, when I was interviewing people, I used to say they would be like, "Yeah, and then my mother murdered my father, and then or my father murdered my mother," and I'd be like, and then she'd say something powerful like, "And I've learned so much," and then I'm like, "I love that," and then I'm like, "I don't love that."
Yeah, I've done that too. Someone's like, "I was suicidal." I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome," but I would say that, and then anyway, I've been going back and listening to older episodes, and
don't do it. It's painful.
I use every conversation to say obviously like 25 times. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
obviously. I'm like, dang it. I was telling one of my friends, Jacob, like, I was like, dude, I need to stop saying obviously. So, but these are episodes from like 2 years ago. So it's like,
yeah,
I
just
must
let
have
them
been.
be. Let them rest.
Yeah, you say that's awesome. And I mean, oh, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing it.
Exactly.
You're
That's
doing
exactly
good
it.
now, but you're right. So I don't know why I laugh even when
That's
I
okay.
tell my own suicide thing of like how I had these
Probably just our brains protecting us. Like,
well,
laying on the floor crying.
my mom and I laughed about a lot of stuff later on, right? But I had these movies like Redbox, where you go to the thing and you do the movies, and I was always renting stuff. And so my mom, when I was in the coma, or like maybe when I got out, she was like, I didn't know how to return the Redbox movies. Like, how do you go and put it in the machine? Like, and I was like, that's what you're stressed out about is the Redbox movies. So we laughed about that because in the moment she was obviously so overwhelmed,
Yes.
And so we laughed about that later. She's like, "Oh, I figured it out. How you return the movie." It's on my card. Okay, I'm the one getting charged $20. You forget about
Send a
it, like
receipt.
stays on.
Send a message to Redbox like, I was in a
Anyway,
coma. Can I
so
get those $30 back, please?
no, but I do think it's important. I have had a lot of serious conversations before. These are real things. And I think we laugh when stuff is in kind of hindsight. Like we laugh at like, oh, I can't believe I did that when I was in pain. So we're not making light of people's suffering, but
No,
laughing is just a way of coping. So I'm just
I think so.
criticizing myself on my own podcast. So
Yeah, be nice to yourself. That's what my
I was
podcast is
just
all
like, why
about.
is my
Compassion.
instinct to laugh? Or like when you were talking about MySpace, I was like, oh, I remember MySpace. Like, could be traumatic for somebody. So anyway,
That's funny. No, MySpace. Anyway.
so you
Okay, what
got
was I?
back on a medication, right? So you were saying that
Yes.
you had this
Oh,
time where you got off of stuff, then and then you got into we were talking about like the holistic
therapies.
approach and kind of
Yes,
these
because you've asked like
alternative.
what else I've done to cope and
Yeah,
everything.
exactly. Yeah. Yes.
And so I think it was important to say just like the medicine rescued me so I can have now I have my mental head back and now I'm like, learning more about mindfulness and meditation. I've started looking into meditation and what else have I learned? Just the art therapy game changer to go in and pretty much I can tell the story of my son coding now without bawling. Like I used to not be able to
Mhm.
get through that because when I told the story, I felt my body felt the like was in the moment and
Yeah.
now I've
Interesting.
I've replaced that association so I can tell the story, I know the facts, but I don't relive it when I tell it anymore.
I'm gonna
So,
check out art association replacement
replace.
therapy. Okay, I'll check that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then the biggest thing which is to round it all out, I guess, is that
Right.
my podcast, whether you have bipolar disorder, whether you are depressed, anxious, whether you're someone who goes to church, who doesn't go to church, whether you're someone who believes in medication or believes in the holistic approach, I have found this utopia area for myself of just accepting what I believe, honoring my beliefs, and totally allowing someone else to honor their beliefs. And it's really through vulnerability. Like when I have been gathering these stories and telling these stories, I have created this beautiful place where people can just believe what they believe
Yeah.
and not feel hate towards each other. Like I just did an episode of a girl who actually left her church and she just came on and shared her story. And I told my faith crisis and then she told her faith crisis and both of us ended up different. Like she ended up leaving her church and I ended up staying in my church. And we
Mhm.
both cheered for each other because this whole journey of life and
Right.
mental health and everything, everyone's really just doing their best. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
so my podcast is really a
It's
place
cool.
of validation. And it's hard to feel connected in this world these days with seeing everyone's perfect moment. So like my Facebook group is all about just keeping it real and like
That's cool.
inviting people to take a break from keeping it all together.
Yeah.
We can really just be ourselves, be vulnerable. Your tribe will find you and the people that don't like you won't like you and that's okay because you don't need everyone to like you even though it sucks a little bit.
Yeah.
But
It's really good. Yeah. As we get older, things can tend to get more like rigid, and you aren't naturally open to new things as you get older, just naturally, right? So it's like it's kind of like the cliche of like someone who's old and bitter. It's like, oh, well, that makes sense because you've been around for like 80 years. Life is hard. So if you don't forgive or like have healing in your life, then you go the other direction. You just get mad and angry and bitter like all the time. Right.
yeah.
So I think it's like when we go through hard things, especially depression or anxiety, um, like what do we do with that? Like, do we continue to believe in God? Is God like a part of what we're going through? Or all the questions of it. And so a lot of times people just they go to church and get even more pain because it's like, well, church is supposed to be there to understand me. So the fact that you're here today and I'm here today and we're both just like, yeah, we still love God, but we've also been through like a lot of hard stuff. And not that we're like extra special because we have podcasts,
We are. I'm just kidding.
Okay, yeah, we are. Yeah, you guys should all
Everyone's
feel
extra
bad.
special.
Yeah, you guys should all feel bad that you're not recording yourself talking. Um,
Uh,
but does that make sense? Kind of
for
like
free.
living in the tension of kind of deconstruction, even, right? That's kind of a whole movement of people deconstructing, and I think many of us probably don't fully understand what that is, but the idea of just asking questions,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, and maybe some people don't like when people say that. At the end of the day, it's about love,
Yeah.
right? So loving yourself, rightly loving your family, loving your friends, and without love, um, there's like suffering
Yeah.
because there's still suffering when you have love in your life, but they kind of balance each other out.
You at least have hope when you have love.
Yeah.
Like, if there's just suffering without love, then it's just suffering, I think.
So, what was your religious background?
So I grew up a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Some
Okay.
people know it as Mormon, but there's a few different types of Mormon. So we've been
Okay.
asked to say Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So yeah, actually the same religion as Portia Louder, who you've had on your
Yeah, I remember. I
show.
have her book too, and I'm
Oh, I know, isn't it amazing? I love
too.
her.
Well, I'm really anyway. I need to finish it.
I have
It's like
to listen to books. I can't read because I think I might be dyslexic. So
she
I
did.
listen to
She
books.
actually gave me a free audio of it.
Just listen to it.
I know. I
Sorry, I
this
just shamed you.
interview is
I
about
take
you.
it back.
No,
Oh yeah, okay.
my closest friends. I'm like, I have said this like 30 times. I'm like, oh yeah, dude, I started that book and I only read like the first two chapters. The only books I like at Paris, I read her book because she was. I try to read
But
people's stuff when they're on the
that connected
podcast.
to you directly because you understand bipolar disorder. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I try. I've had people on who have books, and like there's a handful where I'm like, oh shoot, I read like half of it, or I listened to half of it. So I try to read people's stuff. So anyway,
That's cool.
um, oh yeah, I was just curious because I didn't ask. You just said church and stuff, and
Oh yeah. So let me give you a little bit of that, like that faith
Sure, yeah, like what was your
situation.
experience with that?
So I grew up in that church and always just did it perfectly by the book. Which it's pretty simple. It's just a form of Christianity. And it wasn't until going through all this stuff with my son Jackson and everything, and it wasn't until like I had trials where I started to like doubt and have questions. And I think oftentimes where we have issues is um, we think having questions is bad. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's bad. I think it's good. I think
Right.
questioning your beliefs is actually
Yeah,
really good
I agree with you. Yeah,
because then you know what you believe and not just like having a testimony because your parents had a testimony. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So you can listen to the episode called The Woman Who Left if you want to hear my whole faith crisis. I talk all about it in there.
okay,
But ultimately, I just decided that that the thing that I didn't like about church, what I love about church is what you just said, love. The gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is love. And some people think Jesus Christ is mercy, or not mercy, justice. Like there's justice and there's mercy. And I like only God can balance that perfectly. And God is in charge of justice, and I am asked to just be merciful. And so the thing that I struggled the most with church in general is there's good Christians and there's good members of the church, and then there's members of the church who, have raped someone, or, there's good Catholics, and then there's Catholics that got into the icky stuff of Catholics. There's Catholics, there's Baptists, there's atheists, there's good people and there's bad people everywhere.
right.
And so I just didn't like what I didn't like is church sometimes has a culture of judginess, and I don't like that. And it was hard for me because as an LDS, like you can't get married in the LDS. It stands for Latter-day Saint. You
Right.
can't get married. Like gay people cannot get married in the LDS temple, and they have come out and said because we believe in the family, and a man cannot, create a family. But I have like cousins, and I have people that I love who are gay and friends who are gay, and
Right.
just this whole judging. And so that's what I love about my podcast is I'm trying to tell both stories. Like some people, or like abortion, or all of this stuff that seems black and white, none of it's black and white. It's everyone living their own journey. people who don't believe in abortion have been through something to not believe in abortion. People who think abortion should be allowed are people who have been through a life that led them to believe that. And both can exist. That's the problem, is we're trying to figure out what's
Yeah.
right and what's wrong and keep it black and white, but life isn't black and white. And my
Yeah.
podcast is a place where it's not black and white.
Yeah.
It's just letting people tell their story as it's true to them, and it's okay if they believe that and I believe something else. We could still love and celebrate each other without giving up our own beliefs. And so stopping comparing ourselves and starting to listen. I
Yeah.
think especially with our mental health, how often, sorry, I forget to breathe because I get so excited. I forgot to exhale.
No, you're doing great. It's really good. Yeah.
How often do we look at other people and let it put us down, like in our especially in mental health? Like, they have bipolar, but they seem fine. How come I'm not fine? Well, have you gone beyond their picket fence? Have you heard their whole story?
Right.
Because they're in a different part of their journey. We can't compare.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing the experience with faith and stuff. I really appreciate that. And that's my goal from the beginning with this podcast was always merging faith and mental health, which are, big subjects, and everyone's got a different background. And, um, but yeah, I think it's, when I look at the Gospels closely, I'm like, Jesus is really only really using people who have problems, or I mean, really the whole Bible, right? It's
Yeah.
not, it's all people who have like tons of issues. And so that doesn't mean like we never try to do better.
Yeah.
That's not what that means. It's like, oh, well, I can be dysfunctional and God can use me. It's like, well, it's both. He kind of meets us where we're at today. So the flip side of it then is in relationships with people, like you're talking about, um, judging, right? What there's a lack of, I know you've talked about Brene Brown. We all love her, right? Like empathy. There's a lack of compassion, and it's really hard not to judge people, right?
Yeah,
That's
that's true.
our instinct is to judge based on even, you know 3 or 4 minutes with someone.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, I already got this person figured out, right? But I think it's more just that, how can we like live in the tension of not trying to fix people all the time and not trying to just, kind of just be like, well, the Bible says, or whatever it is that your belief, like, well, this says this. Most people don't really need that. It's kind of like
Yeah.
going to a support group and like,
Especially if someone like left a church or if someone doesn't believe,
right.
the worst way to get someone to believe is to take a Bible and be like smacking them in the head with it. Like, you are wrong. Ha! Like,
Yeah, no one needs that, but we do need more. Um, yeah, because I think the relationship with love and all of these challenges of anxiety or bipolar,
mhm.
love is what's a better way to say it? Like the person's perspective of love is a huge part of the part of it that's kind of like the cognitive behavioral part of it, which is like, well, what do you think about yourself? Because when
Mhm.
you're depressed all the time, you're probably not having good thoughts about yourself. Your
Nope.
self-love is really low, and
Which
your
I would say
self,
is the
yeah,
adversary. I think the adversary, Satan, is one of his most powerful tools because he can destroy a family if he can destroy a person.
yeah,
If
just
he
get
can
you
get
to
into
just,
your head and make you feel horrible and kill yourself, then that will cause trauma on your kids. And then he has more power over their minds. Like, Satan really, I think it's Satan's strongest tool right now is mental health, actually.
for sure. Yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so you've had this church experience. You've been through some trauma with your family, um, with your kids, or kid.
Can I say
Um,
one more thing about the
yeah,
church thing?
yeah,
You just made me think of this, but is this true for you when you were younger? You thought, like, if I'm good and I follow the rules, I will be blessed and have a good life.
yes, yeah. Well,
And so you come to grow up to
yeah,
realize actually, life is really hard for everyone. And God
yeah,
never said he's going to he never, what's that saying? He never said it would be easy. He just said it would be worth it. So,
Yeah.
like, you're going to have to face these circumstances with or without. And for me, at least, if I have Christ, I have hope.
Yeah, it's called prosperity gospel is a big message, right? The idea of just that kind of like, the kingdom is presented in this way that's like an equation. So it's kind of like if you
Mm.
have faith and you pray and you kind of say the right things and you do the right things out of that belief, kind of like 1 plus 1 equals 2. So kind of your inheritance as a child of God is to have like an abundant life. And so I do believe that some of that's true, but people have kind of equated it to being more like material possessions and also for their mental health to be like, you know, free of anxiety, free of
Yeah.
depression, free of bipolar, because I'm, praying like Jesus says, and ask anything in my name and you'll receive it. And so then that gets kind of taken out of like I've been asking for a Ferrari for like 20 years and I'm driving a Toyota Corolla, so
Yeah.
something so
I have a Toyota Corolla. What color?
Toyotas are
um,
great, but so there's a difference, right? Because then you look
and
at
that,
something like poverty and you go, well, is God blessing that? So it's
yeah.
a little bit like an abundance is in scripture, but it's more talking about like the fruit of the spirit, like love and joy and
Yes.
peace and
And
these
you know what? That
like
reminds me
these,
of
yeah.
one of the biggest reasons I had a faith crisis, and one of the reasons to still like mending my relationship with God is because I prayed for a miracle that Jackson would, instead of getting a valve replacement in his heart, prayed that it would just be healed, or not healed, but like he would just get a repair, because a repair would mean it's better. Replacement means he has to keep getting surgeries.
Okay.
So I believed it. I knew if I pray and fast and I get everyone on Facebook to pray and fast, God will use this miracle and then people will join the church. It's going to be, I created this whole thing. And then unfortunately, that's not how it went. And so I didn't see the miracle that God let me keep my child. And I only saw God didn't give me what I asked for. And so learning, and I used to think I don't have faith anymore, because now when people pray for miracles, I'm like, why pray for that? God's going to do what he wants anyways. So it's a bad attitude. And then my faith turned into, you know what? We can ask, but I have such strong faith that the way God's going to play it out is actually the way it's supposed to be. So it's almost greater faith to let it not go your way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good example. Yeah, I mean it's I appreciate you asking the question because it's like um uh we have to live in that tension of like sometimes it's like we say like God works everything together for good, right, to those that love him, but it's kind of like yeah, but I had to kind of go through a bunch of pain and suffering
Mm-hmm.
to get to a place where I look back and go, "Oh, God was a part of all of that." And we also
Yeah.
can make bad decisions based on, and even with mental health, it's like the fact that I chose to get off of meds. Well, God didn't tell me to do that, but people who were Christians in my life, well, they also didn't tell me to do that, but they kind of like hinted that getting off, some of the meds was a good idea. But at the end of the day, it was all on me. Like I chose
Mm-hmm.
wrongly, but then God used that, right? Like, I mean, I don't, if that makes sense, right? I know I'm not wishing that I would go through another like 9-month episode
No.
so I can learn some lessons.
But when you look back, you see you felt so alone. But when you look back, you see God was there all along. And
Yeah. And
and
I'm
Jesus uses everything for good, and he accounts for the fact that we're just humans.
yeah. And I think we can grow in wisdom and we can pass things on
Yes, and we can help
generationally.
others. If
Yeah.
we're vulnerable, then we can
Well,
connect and help everybody.
yeah. So maybe to bring it full circle to kind of like, why are we both here today, like talking to each other? Well, first of all, I wanted to hear your story. And I love that you've been listening to my episodes, which makes me feel good about myself. Not gonna lie, right?
There you
Not
go.
that
There's
it's
your
all about
dopamine for the day.
yeah, I need to get some more fans, super fans on this. No, I'm just kidding. So, someone's like, "Hey, remember in episode 20 when you said this?" I'd be like, Yeah, sure, I said that. But I mean, I guess kind of to bring it full circle to, I think we have similar desires in why we're doing podcasts, which is kind of the idea of like you're saying, okay, I'm going to be vulnerable, kind of like makes it easier for other people to open up. And I know as a man, which you had said at the beginning, like it is harder to open up just naturally as a guy. And I think I've been kind of blessed with being okay at vulnerability, like even before the bipolar stuff
Yeah.
happened. So it's not like when it happened, it was like super hard to say, "Hey, I'm struggling," our instinct is always like run and hide. But
Yeah.
you've been doing this podcast now for a little while. How many episodes do you have?
I don't know.
Okay, anyway, no worries.
Probably like not very many.
But
Maybe
most of
like
them are you.
20.
Okay, but most of them is you talking to other people.
Yeah, I only have my first one is me, and then I have one where I told everyone where most I haven't done very many solo episodes.
Yeah, no, that's
It's
cool.
all kind of NPR, like everything's cut up and I narrate it. It's kind of art. It's
I like it. I like the format. The one that I listened to, or I started listening to another one where you had like. Anyway, I like the format. You had like a clip in the beginning
yeah,
of
I tell
something that
their
somebody
story
said.
and then I weave in like my own vulnerability too because I think it's important. I can't just go to everyone else and say, "Tell me all your story." I also like
Yeah,
to weave
yeah.
in my
I like that.
vulnerability
I
too.
might steal that idea.
Do it. It's
So
a lot of editing.
you're right. Okay, never mind. Nope, too much
Yeah,
work. Nope, too much work. No, I'm
I
kidding.
edit so freaking much.
Okay, well, okay, so we'll try to kind of
And I naturally like to hear other people. Like that's what I do is I try to get the
yeah.
details out of other people. So I naturally am like, oh yeah, tell me your story.
Well, yeah, and then the cool thing is that I mean now I've had the podcast for like 3 years and a few months or whatever, right? Since March
Wow.
2019 or January 2019 when I started recording. So that's a while, right? And now
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it's kind of like a blog where you chart your journey. And I've been listening to older episodes, and I'm like, and I like how I said that, yeah, or whatever. Like, try not to be too critical, And I was struggling a lot, and then like one episode was I was just in the hospital before Christmas, guys.
But it's real. That's what I love.
Yeah,
And that's
but
what
it's
you
kind of
get from
cool.
my podcast too is just we need people to be
Yeah,
real and raw so that everyone
yeah.
realizes not everything is perfect and you're not alone.
So you've kind of found, okay, so here's my concluding question, and I do ask this to a lot of people, but
Okay.
like if someone was in front of you that was really struggling, or they, you know, messaged you on Instagram, or they hear you on this podcast and they ask for your advice because they think you're awesome, like what advice do you give? Maybe they are suicidal. I mean, I know that that's a huge part of my journey, so it's like if anybody hears that and then asks me, and I have been asked those questions before, and then it's kind of like there's a part of me that's like, even after all these years, I still feel like I don't really know what to say a lot. I just don't.
Yeah.
So that's another thing I kind of struggle with, which is like expecting myself to have the answer because I've been doing this for a long time. So, but what would you say if someone was kind of in a crisis and they're like, "What do you think I should do?" Or
Yeah.
what would you say?
I would say
Big question.
what works for me and what I put into play during that time when I was feeling like I was a burden and I would say suicidal, but I don't know that I can really say that because I feel like when you're suicidal you actually would do it and I wouldn't do it. I just wanted to not exist. And I would say connection. Humans need connection. And I set up I knew exactly when I went into these dips of when I hated myself, I literally was curled up on the floor right over there crying. I reached out, I set up a network of 5 people. One that I could call who has depression and I knew would validate me and say, not give me advice, not tell me what to do, not tell me to take my medicine or whatever. They would just listen and say, I know, me too. Two, I called two of my sisters. Actually, I called a lot of my sisters. I have a lot of sisters, but just told them, like, hey, I'm struggling. Pray for me, because they're just like my cheerleaders. And then I called my life coach, who kind of lightly was like, everything is fine. This is what's supposed to happen. And I'm like, how can you say that? This is all good. Nothing's gone wrong. That's what life coaches say. Nothing's gone wrong. This is supposed to be happening. And I'm like, you're not hearing me, lady.
Yeah.
And then I called someone who will make sure you're safe. I would call my mom, and she a few times dropped everything and came just in case. Make sure
Wow.
you're not alone. So set up a plan. So when you're in those moments, you know exactly who to call.
Right.
And then I just want to close with from Daring Greatly. I love Brene Brown.
Yeah, go for it.
I used to talk a lot, and I would always pray, like I said in my intro, you said in my intro, I used to pray that I could be quiet and calm and keep my own secrets. And then I read this line in Daring Greatly, and I realized that vulnerability is a superpower. So it says, vulnerability is the core, the heart, the center of meaningful human experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage people to open up and connect with someone and have a real human experience.
That's awesome. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And I mean, this might sound like a weird thing to say. We're like practicing what we preach by doing.
Yeah. We don't have it perfect.
Well, yeah. And I think, what's the definition of perfect, right? And I think perfect for a lot of us, if we don't think too much about it, especially in our culture, it's like devoid of conflict, or it's perfection is like there's no struggle. So, because I do it too. You're talking about comparing yourself at the beginning. Keep going. So my advice to someone would be like, don't give up.
Yeah.
Which, what does that mean? Or like, you're in survival mode. I know exactly what that's like. But I like what you said. Who can you reach out to? Do you have friends? It doesn't have to be a lot of people. It can just be one person.
Yeah, I'm high maintenance, so I needed 5.
Well, I think
Just
we're
kidding.
similar
I'm
because
not high
I'm high
maintenance.
maintenance too. I'm like, I just texted 30 people today, and where are those people now?
It's an extrovert thing, but yeah, you have to have someone who can. Yeah, just have a plan. That was my plan. That's what worked for me. But you got to have a plan. My whole setup, it's kind of crazy. I actually am not super in love with it.
You never showed off your shirt.
Everyone, let's all be better humans.
Okay, we'll get a funny clip of that. So yeah. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Oh, yes, of course. Thank you for asking this.
Do it again.
Where can people reach me?
All right. Very end of the show, I'll put your information in the show notes. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you? I know you have a podcast and you're on Instagram.
Yes, I'm on Instagram at Beyond with Chelsea. And I do have a website, but mostly I would love people to just go listen to an episode. Go listen to The Woman Who Left, and it will just show you how my show really helps people connect and have no judgment and stop comparing.
Okay.
And then I am always, like you, looking for people to come on the show. So if anyone wants to come on the show, just reach out to me through Instagram message or Facebook Messenger. My Facebook is called ChelseaBea, BEA. And last thing is, if you're looking for a place for less perfection on Facebook, so you don't feel like you're seeing everyone's perfect moments, I have a Facebook group called Beyond the Picket Fence Community. So,
cool. Okay.
Where everyone can just come and be normal, not normal, but not perfect.
Don't worry.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. We'll be in touch. All right. Okay.
Bye.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. I will put all of the info for Chelsea's podcast and how you can get a hold of her. She's on Facebook and Instagram. And I will put a link to her podcast as well. And I hope you guys can go support her, check out the work that she's doing. And who knows, maybe she'll be back on the podcast someday. I would love to do part 2 with a lot of different people. And I just added it up the other day. I think Chelsea is guest number 82. As in, I mean, for the whole entirety of the podcast, 82 guests, which is, I don't know if I ever would have thought I'd talked to that many people on here, but we're coming up on 4 years. In January, it will be 4 years when we started recording. So thank you guys all for supporting. And also, if you notice in the end of show notes, I always have a link for Apple Podcast. And that's just because that's the only platform you can leave a review. And working on a website still, and hopefully get that up soon. Hopefully by like the beginning of next year. That will be rocking. And follow me on Instagram. I did change my Instagram name to Jared Deal 8, but all the podcast stuff goes on there as well. And I am back on Facebook, so I'll post a link if you guys want to follow me. All right. We'll see you next time, guys. Thanks for listening to the podcast.